The gravel lot behind the train station still lives in my body. I was 14. My mother rolled the window down 2 inches, just enough for her voice. My father did not turn around. He kept both hands on the wheel like the road was the only thing that needed him. There was one duffel bag at my feet and a cold coming off the rails. "Let's see how she finds her way home," my mother said. Then the taillights pulled out of the lot and the dark came down. I never went back. Not that night, not the next year, not once in 20 years. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. I'm Atlee, 34. This is the story of the night my parents drove off, and the morning, 20 years later, they came back to find me. They expected a girl who'd learned her lesson. What waited for them was something else entirely. If you've ever been blamed for surviving what someone did to you, stay with me. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. People always want the big reason. They want a crime that fits the punishment. There wasn't one. We were 3 hours from home, coming back from a cousin's wedding. I'd said something in the car. I'd rolled my eyes at my mother and muttered that she always made everything about her. That was it. That was the whole sin. My mother went quiet in the way that meant a storm was loading. Then she told my father to pull off at the next station. He did. She turned in her seat and said I needed to learn what life was without all the things this family handed me. She called it tough love. She said a hard lesson now would save me from being soft later. My father stared straight ahead the entire time. He never argued with her, not in 23 years of marriage, and he wasn't going to start over a teenager's bad attitude. They told me to get out. I thought it was a scare. I got out because I always did what they said. I stood on the gravel with my duffel and waited for the doors to unlock again. The engine didn't cut. My mother leaned to the cracked window and gave me the line I would carry the rest of my life. "Let's see how she finds her way home." The car pulled out slow, almost casual, like they were running an errand. I kept thinking they'd loop the lot and come back laughing. The taillights got smaller. Then they were gone, and it was just me, the rails, and a station clock ticking toward a dark I had no plan for. Nobody came back that night. I want you to sit with that, because for years I couldn't. Here is the part my family never told anyone. I did everything right. I didn't wander off. I didn't hitchhike. I went inside the station and found the ticket window. There was an older man behind the glass named Hollis, and I must have looked like exactly what I was, because his face changed the second he saw me. I told him the truth in a flat little voice. My parents drove away and left me. I gave him their names. I gave him the make of the car. He didn't lecture me, and he didn't doubt me. He picked up the phone and called the police, and he kept talking to me in a low, even way until they came. A county deputy showed up within the hour. She crouched down to my level and asked me what happened, and she wrote it all down in a small notebook. Every detail. The wedding, the argument, the window, the line. She tried the number I gave her for my parents. It rang and rang. She left a message saying she had their daughter and to call back immediately. Nobody called back that night. She made a note of that too. That report exists. There is a date on it, and a time, and a deputy's signature, and a line that says the responding officer was unable to reach the parents. I didn't understand yet how much that piece of paper would matter. I just knew a stranger believed me when my own family had decided I was a problem to be parked. The deputy asked if I had anyone. I said no. And that was when a woman from across the lot walked into the station drying her hands on her apron. Her name was Maeve Dolan, and she ran the diner that sat across the station lot like it had grown out of the ground. She'd seen the squad car lights through her front window. She came over to see what a deputy and a kid were doing in her quiet station at 9 at night. Maeve was maybe 60 then, built solid, with reading glasses pushed up in gray hair and flour on one sleeve. She listened to the deputy explain. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I could sleep in the apartment over the diner, just for the night, until things got sorted. The deputy knew her. Half the county knew her. So that's where I went. Maeve didn't fuss over me and she didn't pity me, which was the only reason I could stand to be there. She set me up on a cot, gave me a glass of milk and a slice of pie, and told me the bathroom was down the hall. The next morning, she didn't ask me to leave. She handed me an apron instead. She said if I was going to eat her food, I could learn to buss a table, and something in me unclenched, because that I understood. Work, I understood. Owing nobody anything, I understood. One night turned into a week. A week turned into the rest of my growing up. I learned later that Maeve had buried a husband and never had children, and that the empty apartment over her diner had been waiting a long time for somebody. I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew that a stranger had given me a job and a bed, and my own mother had given me a gravel lot and a sentence. It took about 3 weeks for the story to find its shape back home. A social worker named Carol Briggs got assigned to my case, and she drove out to the diner to talk to me. She was kind and she was sharp, and she carried a file folder that already had pages in it. She told me she'd spoken to my parents. I asked what they said. She hesitated, the way decent people do before they hand you something heavy. They told the county I'd run away. They told the neighbors, the church, anyone who asked, that I had a wild streak and took off ungrateful after everything they'd given me. She ran off. Ungrateful. That was the line my mother used. Carol Briggs had it written in her notes because my mother said it to her face. I remember the room going very still inside me. I was 14, sitting in a vinyl booth, learning that my parents had not lost me. They had recast me. Carol asked if I wanted to go home. She had to ask. I said no. I said it without crying, which seemed to surprise her, and I have never once regretted it. The county did a kinship-style arrangement with Maeve, all of it documented, all of it legal. My parents signed the papers that let it happen, which tells you everything. They didn't fight. They wanted the version where I was the one who left, so I let them keep it, on the outside. But Carol Briggs gave me her business card and said, "If you ever need any of this, it's yours. It's your record." I put the card in a drawer and tried to forget the whole town 3 hours away that had decided what kind of girl I was. The years from 14 to 18 went by in Greece and homework. I bussed tables, then I ran the dish station, then Maeve taught me the flat top, and by 16 I could run a Saturday breakfast rush without dropping a ticket. I got myself to school every morning and back to the diner every afternoon. I made the honor roll twice, mostly out of spite, partly because the library was warm. I never called home. They never called the diner. The case file stayed open with the county until I turned 18, and then a letter came saying it was closed, no further action, and that was the only acknowledgement the system ever gave that anything had happened to me at all. I learned to need nobody. That sounds like strength. For a long time I thought it was. I wouldn't let Maeve buy me a winter coat without paying her back from tips. I wouldn't take a ride if I could walk. If a thing went wrong in the kitchen, I fixed it myself at midnight, rather than ask for help in the morning. Maeve watched me do this for years and finally said one thing about it. She said, "Atlee, leaning on somebody isn't the same as being left." I didn't believe her. I'd been left. I knew exactly how easy it was. So I built a self that couldn't be parked in a gravel lot ever again. A self that owed nothing and asked for nothing and could survive a dark with no plan. It worked. It also cost me, in ways I wouldn't add up until much later. But at 18, I wasn't counting costs. I was counting covers and tips and the number of years left until that diner could somehow, someday, be mine. Maeve didn't hand me the diner. That would have offended us both. When I was 26, she offered to sell me a steak, on terms, like a real buyer, and I took it and paid every month without missing. By 30, I owned the whole thing, papers in my name, the loan in my name, the risk in my name. Then I went to work on what it could become. The diner had been a good, tired place for 30 years. I made it a good, alive place. I kept Maeve's pie recipes exactly, because some things you don't touch. But I redid the floor, opened up the back wall, added a Sunday brunch that pulled people from 2 towns over. We went from 40 covers on a busy day to 160. I hired a cook named Diego who could have worked anywhere and stayed because I paid him right and listened to him. I hired Pam, a 50-year-old Army veteran who ran the floor like a sergeant and loved every regular like family. We expanded into the empty unit next door. Twice the seating. The bell over the front door rang all day. I lived in the apartment upstairs, the same one where I'd slept on a cot at 14. Except now it was mine, with my name on the deed and Maeve's old reading chair by the window. Strangers who came in for the first time always said the same thing. They said it felt like home. They had no idea what that word cost me, or how far I'd had to walk from a gravel lot to earn the right to make a place that felt like the thing I never got. I built it anyway. That's the part my family would never have predicted. I didn't just survive the lesson, I outgrew it. I won't pretend the armor came free. By my early 30s, I had a thriving business, a paid-down loan, and almost no one I let all the way in. I dated, a little, and ended things the second a man started to feel like weight I'd have to carry or be carried by. I worked open to close because resting felt like trusting the day not to fall apart without me. Diego once told me, gently, that I treated asking for help like a moral failure. He wasn't wrong. The girl who got left taught me a rule, and the rule was simple. If you never need anyone, no one can drive off and leave you in the dark. So that's the life I'm telling you about. A woman of 34 with a full diner, a chosen family of staff and regulars, a wall I'd kept up for 20 years, and a peace I'd built one shift at a time. That peace was the thing I had to protect. Not the building, not the money, the quiet, the knowing that the people in my life were there because they chose to be, not because blood obligated them. Stay with me here, because that wall, the one I'd spent 2 decades reinforcing, was about to get a knock on it from the one direction I never let myself watch. If you've ever rebuilt yourself out of what someone broke, you already know the sound I mean. Tell me in the comments where you found your own way home. Maeve died the winter I turned 33. It was quiet, in her sleep, the way she'd have wanted, and the whole town came to the diner after the service because there was nowhere else that made sense. I cooked for 200 people that day, and didn't sit down once, because sitting down would have meant feeling it. She left me almost nothing on paper, since I'd already bought everything from her fair and square. But her lawyer handed me an envelope and a small thing wrapped in a dish towel. Inside the towel was a tin box, the kind that holds shortbread at Christmas, dented at one corner, taped shut. There was a note rubber-banded to the top in Maeve's slanted hand. It said, "For when you're ready, not before." I wasn't ready. I knew, the way you know a sore tooth before you touch it, that whatever was in that box was about the gravel lot, and the girl I'd been, and I had spent 20 years not touching that. So I put the tin on the high shelf in my apartment, behind the good dishes, and I left it taped. I grieved Maeve by working. I kept her pies on the menu and her chair by the window and her habit of comping the table when a young person came in looking lost. But the box stayed up there, dented and waiting, for the better part of a year. Some part of me believed that as long as it stayed shut, the past stayed where I'd left it, 3 hours and 20 years away. I should have known better. The past doesn't honor the deals you make with it alone. It only waits until you've built something worth coming back for. It started with a stranger who wasn't quite a stranger. A woman came in for brunch one Sunday, 60s, church clothes, and she kept looking at me too long while Pam seated her. When I came by to refill her coffee, she said my name like a question. "Atlee? Atlee Travers?" My stomach dropped to floor. I said yes. She said she knew my mother, Brenda, from the old town, said they'd sung in the choir together for years. She said it warmly, like she was handing me a gift. Then she said the thing that turned the morning cold. She said it was such a shame. What happened? The way I ran off so young and broke my poor mother's heart, and that Brenda still talked about it, still asked the congregation to pray that her wayward daughter would come home someday. The woman patted my hand. She thought she was being kind. I stood there holding a coffee pot in a diner I'd built from nothing, 3 hours and 20 years from that gravel lot, and I understood that the lie was not dead. It had a whole life of its own back home. It had a choir, and prayers, and a grieving mother at the center of it, And that grieving mother was the woman who rolled the window down and told the dark to keep me. I poured the coffee. My hand didn't shake, because I don't let it. I thanked her and moved on to the next table. But something old and cold woke up in my chest that morning, something I'd boxed up as carefully as Maeve had taped that tin. The story was alive. And if it was alive, then sooner or later, the people telling it were going to want their ending. The first call came 9 days later. Pam took the message because I was on the line, and she handed me the slip with a look I couldn't read. A woman had called asking for me by my full name. She'd left a number and a single sentence. "Tell her it's her sister Renata, and it's important." I had not heard the name Renata out loud in 20 years. My sister Rennie was 5 years older than me, the responsible one, the one our parents trusted to keep me in line on that drive home, which is a detail that matters more than I knew at 14. I waited 2 days before I called back. When I did, Rennie's voice came on smooth and rehearsed, the voice of a woman who'd practiced this in her car. She said it was so good to hear me. She said the family had thought about me every single day. She said Mom wasn't well and that life was short, and that family should be family, no matter what happened in the past. Notice what she did not say. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She did not say, "We left you." She did not say the word station. She talked for 4 minutes about healing and forgiveness, and never once named the thing that needed forgiving. I'd run a diner for years. I knew a customer working up to a complaint they hadn't said yet. I knew the shape of a person circling toward an ask. So I kept my voice even and I asked her plainly what she actually wanted. There was a pause on the line, a real one, the kind that tells you the script just ran out. And in that pause I heard the truth coming before she ever said it. Rennie didn't give me the whole thing on that call. She gave me a piece and let me imagine the rest, which is its own kind of manipulation. She said Dad's health had taken a turn. She said his kidneys were failing, that he was on dialysis 3 days a week, that the doctors had him on a transplant list that was years long. Then she said the family was getting tested. Blood relatives, she said, were the best chance for a living donor match. She let that sit. She did not, on that first call, ask me to give my father a kidney. She was too careful for that. She just made sure I understood that there was a need only blood could fill, and that I was blood, and that the clock was loud. After we hung up, I sat in Maeve's chair by the window for a long time. I felt a lot of things, but the cleanest one was clarity. This was not a family that had spent 20 years missing me and finally found the courage to apologize. This was a family that had run out of options and remembered they had a spare daughter. The prayers, the choir, the wayward girl story, all of it had been the public version. The private version was a man on dialysis and a list of relatives to test. I was not a daughter coming home. I was a possible organ. And the worst part, the part that sat coldest, was that some buried 14-year-old corner of me still wanted to matter to them enough to say yes. That was the corner I did not trust. That was the corner that had once stood on gravel waiting for the taillights to turn around. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it would have been easy to just hang up the past forever and never answer another call. I didn't do that. Not because I owed them, but because I'm not a person who decides things blind. I sat with it for a week. I asked myself the hard question. If my father was truly dying, did 20 years of silence mean I should let him die without even looking at the facts? I didn't have a clean answer. What I had instead was a colder, steadier instinct, the one Maeve had spent years trying to teach me to trust. Before I let a single one of those people back into my life, before I let them stand in my diner or near the quiet I'd built, I needed to know exactly what was true. Not their version. Not my 14-year-old memory, which they'd spent 2 decades telling me I'd gotten wrong. The actual record. I'd spent my whole adult life believing that paper was safer than people, that a signed contract kept its word when no one else did. Now that belief had somewhere to go. There was a report from that night. There was a deputy's signature and a social worker's file. There was a woman named Carol Briggs who'd handed me a card and said, "It's your record." I'd kept that card in a drawer for 20 years like a fuse I never lit. If they were going to come at me with the wayward daughter story in front of God and the choir, I was not going to argue from memory and feeling. I was going to argue from the file. So I went up to the apartment, and I reached behind the good dishes, and I took down the tin box that Maeve told me to open when I was ready. The tape on the tin had gone brittle. It split under my thumbnail with a small, dry sound, and I sat down on the floor of my own kitchen because my legs told me to. Inside, on top, was a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a train ticket stub. My train ticket stub. The one I'd been holding the night they left me. A return to a home that drove off without me. I have no memory of giving it to Maeve. She must have taken it from my coat that first week, when I was too numb to notice, and kept it for 20 years. Under the stub was a business card, soft at the corners. Carol Briggs, County Family Services, with a phone number and a case number written on the back in pencil. My case number. Maeve had kept that too. And under the card was a single sheet of lined paper, folded twice, with my name on the front in Maeve's slanted hand. I almost couldn't open it. When I did, it was short, because Maeve was never a woman of many words. She wrote that she'd loved me like the daughter the good Lord never sent her. She wrote that she'd kept everything, every scrap, because she'd watched too many people get talked out of their own lives by folks who could lie with a straight face. And then she wrote the line, "I will carry the way I carry my mother's, except this one I carry like a spine instead of a wound. Keep the proof, honey. People lie, paper doesn't." I sat on that floor and I cried for the first time about any of it, not for the family that left me, but for the one who stayed and saw me clearly enough to arm me for a day she knew was coming and didn't live to see. Then I dried my face, and I picked up the card, and I made a call I should have made years before. Carol Briggs had retired, but the county office she'd worked for had not gone anywhere, and neither had my file. It turns out you have a right to your own records. A former youth in the system can request the case file that was built about her life, and a person can request a copy of a police report that named her as the subject. I didn't need a lawyer for the first steps, though I called one anyway, because that's how I do things. I wanted no question about whether any of this was clean. The lawyer, a calm woman named Frances, told me I was well within my rights, walked me through exactly which forms to file and which office held which document, and told me to keep copies of everything I sent. So that's what I did. I filled out the request for my CPS case file. I filled out the request for the police welfare check report from the night of, with the date and the county and the responding agency. I included the case number Maeve had saved in pencil, which made the clerk's jobs easy and made me sound like a woman who knew exactly what she was asking for, because by then I was. I paid the small copying fees. I wrote my diner's address on the return line, the address of the place I'd built. 3 hours and 20 years from where the story started. And then I did the hardest thing a hyper-self-reliant person can do, which is wait on other people to send you something you can't control. I worked my shifts. I refilled coffee. I kept the bell over the door ringing. And every afternoon, when the mail came, I checked for a thick manila envelope with a county seal, and for 2 weeks it wasn't there. And then, one Tuesday, it was. I waited until after close to open it. I sat in a back booth with the lights low and the chairs up, and I slit the envelope with a butter knife. The police welfare check report came first. Reading it was strange, like reading about a stranger I happened to have been. There was the date. There was the time, 9:40 at night. There was the station's name, and Hollis the ticket agent listed as the reporting party, and the deputy's name and badge number. There was a clean, official summary of what a 14-year-old had told her in a vinyl booth, and it matched my memory so exactly that I had to put it down for a second. And then there was the line. The deputy had written that she made multiple attempts to contact the minor's parents by phone, that she left a message identifying herself and stating that their daughter was in custody of the county pending their response, and that the parents did not return contact that night. A later entry, dated days afterward, noted that the parents, once reached, declined to return for the minor and stated the child had chosen to leave the home. declined to return for the minor. In a deputy's handwriting, in a county file, with a date and a signature. Not my memory, not my feeling. The record. Then I opened the CPS file and found Carol Briggs's notes, including the sentence she'd written down because my mother said it to her face, the one about me running off ungrateful. The lie and the truth, in the same envelope, in the county's own hand. I sat there a long while. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter and heavier. I felt seen, 20 years late, by the only witnesses who'd written it all down. The pressure ramped up fast once they sensed I wasn't going to come running. Rennie called twice more, the warmth thinning each time. Then the texts started, and they weren't all from her. My mother got herself a phone number I didn't recognize and sent me a message that read like a sermon, all about honoring your father and mother and the shortness of life, and how God forgives those who soften their hearts. Not one word about a station. Then a sharper one, the next day, the mask slipping. She wrote that she'd raised me better than to abandon family in their hour of need, and the irony of that sentence nearly knocked me off my stool. Abandon family. From her. Rennie tried a different angle, said she'd hate for things to get ugly, said the family was prepared to come in person if I kept ignoring them, said it like a courtesy and meant it like a threat. And here's the thing about a threat to a woman who's already survived the worst version of you. It doesn't land the way you hope. Let me say something to you directly, because if you're listening to this, odds are someone in your life has used family as a crowbar to pry open a door you closed on purpose. You're allowed to keep it closed. You're allowed to ask what they want before you let them in. You're allowed to need proof. I texted Rennie back something short and plain. I said if they wanted to talk, they could come to the diner on a Sunday in daylight, and we'd talk in front of God and everybody, just like she said. I meant it as a boundary. She read it as a victory. We were both about to find out which of us was right. I didn't pick the diner on a Sunday by accident. I picked it because it was mine, and because it was full. For 20 years, my family had told their version in rooms I wasn't in, to people who'd never heard mine. The choir, the neighbors, the prayer chain, all of it happened on their ground, with their audience, and I'd never been there to put a single fact on the table. If they wanted to come at me again, they were going to do it on my floor, in my light, surrounded by people who knew me as the woman who'd built this place, not as a story they'd been told. That's the only kind of fair fight I was interested in. I want to be clear that I wasn't planning an ambush. I wasn't going to scream or make a scene or do anything I'd be ashamed of later. I'd watched my mother weaponize being the calmest, most righteous person in the room my whole childhood, and I knew the truth about that trick. The person who stays calm wins the room. So I made a copy of the police report and the relevant page of the CPS file. Just 2 sheets, the date, the time, the line. I put them in a plain folder. I didn't tell Diego or Pam the whole story, but I told Pam that some family I wasn't close to might come in Sunday, and that I'd handle it, and that I might need her near. Pam, who'd done 2 tours and didn't rattle, just nodded and said she'd keep the coffee coming and her eyes open. That was all I needed. I had my ground, my witnesses, my proof, and 20 years of practice at staying level when somebody tried to tell me I didn't happen the way I happened. If you've never had a chosen family, it's hard to explain what they're worth until you watch a blood family try to take their place. The week before that Sunday, I looked around the diner with new eyes. There was Diego at the flat top, who'd come to my 40th cover panic years ago and never once let me down. There was Pam, who called every widower at the counter by name and remembered how they took their eggs. There were the regulars, Earl, who came in at 6 for black coffee, and the paper, the Hutchins family with their 4 kids and their standing Sunday booth, the nurses from the night shift who came in for breakfast on their way to sleep. None of these people shared my blood. Every one of them had chosen day after day to keep coming back. That's a thing my parents never understood about me, that I'd built the exact opposite of a gravel lot. I'd built a place nobody got driven away from. The irony wasn't lost on me. The lesson my mother tried to teach was that I couldn't find my way without them. What I'd actually learned was how to build a home so solid that other people found their way to me. I didn't tell the regulars anything. I didn't need to. I just felt, that week, the weight of what was mine, and it steadied me. When you know what you stand on, it's a lot harder to knock you down. Sunday came up the calendar the way storms come up the coast, slow, and then all at once. I slept badly Saturday night. But when I woke, I wasn't afraid. I was something better than fearless. I was ready, in the way Maeve had told me I'd be one day, with the proof and the patience to use it. Rennie didn't wait for Sunday. She showed up Saturday afternoon, alone, the way scouts go ahead of the army. I was wiping down the counter when the bell rang, and a woman in her late 30s walked in. And I knew her instantly, even after 20 years. She had our mother's mouth and our father's way of not quite meeting your eyes. She stopped a few feet inside the door and looked around the full, bright, humming room I'd made, and I watched something flicker across her face that she tried to swallow. It looked a lot like surprise. Maybe even something close to shame. She'd expected, I think, to find me struggling. The story they told required me to be struggling. A wayward girl who ran off ungrateful was supposed to have a hard, small life, not 160 covers and her name on the deed. I poured her a coffee she didn't ask for and sat across from her, because I'm a host before I'm anything else. She talked for a while about how nice the place was, how she always knew I was resourceful. She talked about Mom and Dad getting older. She circled and circled. And then, for just a second, the circling stopped. And she looked right at me and said, "Lo, you really did all this yourself?" It wasn't a question. For one breath I saw the sister I might have had, the one who knew exactly what they'd done and had spent 20 years not saying it. Then the breath ended. She blinked, and the script came back up over her eyes like a screen, and she said the family really did just want to put the past behind us. The past, like it was a place we'd all left together, instead of a lot I'd been left in alone. I asked Rennie to just say it. Whatever she'd driven all this way to ask, I told her. She could ask it plainly, because I was a grown woman and could handle plain. So she did. She said Dad needed a kidney. She said the family had all been tested and nobody was a match, and the list was years long, and the doctors said a sibling or child was the best remaining hope. She said it like she was offering me an opportunity. She said, "After everything, this is the one thing you could do for family." After everything. I held very still and let that phrase hang in the air between us, all the weight she'd packed into it pointing the wrong direction. Then Rennie did the thing that decided how Sunday was going to go. She must have seen something close down in my face, because she reached for the oldest tool in the family kit. She said gently, like she was reminding me of a shared truth, "Atlee, I know things were hard, and I know you ran off, but you can't punish a dying man for the choices you made as a kid." There it was. 20 years later, sitting in the diner I'd built from a gravel lot, my own sister told me to my face that I ran off. She believed it, or she'd decided to believe it, because the truth would have meant looking at what she'd let happen and what she'd told everyone since. I didn't correct her. Not yet. Not there. With no witnesses. Where it'd just be her word against mine all over again. I just said I'd give them my answer in person. Tomorrow. At the diner. With everyone there. Rennie smiled like she'd won. She had no idea she'd just told me exactly which lie to bring the receipts for. After Rennie left, Pam came over and refilled my coffee without being asked, which is her way of asking if you're all right. I told her the short version, finally. I told her the people coming Sunday were the parents who left me at a train station when I was 14, and that they were here now because they needed something from my body. Pam didn't gasp. She'd seen enough of the world to know it could be that ugly. She just set down the pot and said, "Quiet. And what do you need from me?" I told her the truth. I said I needed her to do nothing. I needed her to let it happen in the open, to keep the regulars comfortable, to trust that I had it handled. The hardest thing for me, the woman who never asked anyone for anything, was to ask Pam to stand close and not act, to witness instead of rescue. She understood that better than I expected. She said sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is let other people see the truth land. I sat with that all evening. The temptation was to do something dramatic, to throw them out, to say the cruelest true thing I could find. But cruelty was their tool, not mine. My mother's whole power had always been her performance of calm goodness over a hard center. I wasn't going to beat that by exploding. I was going to beat it by being exactly what they'd told everyone I wasn't. Steady, decent, right, with the paper to prove it. So I went upstairs and laid out the plain folder on the table by Maeve's chair. 2 sheets, a date, a time, a line. I looked at it a long time. Then I went to bed, and for the first night in weeks, I slept all the way through. I'm telling that slightly out of order, because before I slept, I did one more thing. In the long blue evening, I drove out to where Maeve is buried, on the hill behind the church that isn't my family's church, in a town that took me in instead of throwing me out. I brought her no flowers. Maeve thought cut flowers were a waste of money you could spend feeding somebody. I just stood there in the grass and told her I'd open the box. I told her I'd found the stub and the card and the letter, and that I understood now what she'd been doing all those years, saving the scraps a frightened kid couldn't think to save. I told her about the kidney, and the choir, and the wayward daughter story, and the Sunday that was coming. Standing there, I made myself be honest about my own intentions, because that mattered to me. I wasn't doing this to destroy my family. I had the means to be cruel, and I wasn't going to use it. I wasn't going to drag every ugly thing into the light, or make my father's illness a weapon back at him. I was going to do one thing and one thing only. I was going to put the truth on the table, in front of the people who'd been lied to, and end the lie. After that, whatever they did, was theirs to carry. "Keep the proof, honey," Maeve had written. "People lie. Paper doesn't." Standing on that hill, I finally understood the second half of that sentence. Paper doesn't lie, but it also doesn't gloat. It just sits there being true. That's all I was going to be. I drove back to the diner, to my home, the long way, with the windows down, and the dark didn't scare me at all. Sunday opened bright and busy, the way the good ones do. By 11 the brunch rush was on and every booth was full. Earl had his coffee and his paper at the counter. The Hutchins kids were coloring on the paper placemats in their standing booth. The night nurses were laughing over French toast. Diego was a machine at the flat top, and Pam was everywhere at once. And I worked the floor like always, refilling, clearing, checking in, because the worst thing I could do was look like a woman bracing for something. I wanted the room exactly as it always was. Real, full, alive. Mine. The bell over the door rang 100 times that morning, and each time I clocked it without looking. And then, a little after noon, it rang, and I looked, because some animal part of me knew. There they were. My father came in first, smaller than the man in my memory, gray and thin and moving carefully, a man visibly sick. My mother was behind him in her good Sunday coat, her chin up, already scanning the room the way she scanned a congregation, and Rennie brought up the rear, eyes darting, the only one who looked nervous. The 3 of them stopped just inside the door, in the full bright noise of my diner, and for a moment, nobody moved. 20 years collapsed into the space of that threshold. The last time I'd seen my mother's face, it had been framed in a car window telling the dark to keep me. Now here it was, in my doorway, performing warmth for a room full of strangers. I set down my coffee pot. I wiped my hands on my apron, the same kind of apron Maeve had handed me at 14, and I walked across my own floor to meet them. My mother went to work on the room before I even reached them. That's a skill, and I'll give her that. She opened her arms and said my name like a hymn, loud enough to carry. Atlee. Oh, my Atlee. She told the nearest tables, to no one and everyone, that she hadn't seen her baby girl in 20 years, that this was a day of healing, that the Lord was good. A couple of the regulars looked over, softening, the way people do at a reunion. She reached for me and I let her hug me, because making a scene in the doorway would only feed her version, and she squeezed me theatrically and dabbed at dry eyes. My father hung back, looking at the floor, looking at me, looking at the floor. Rennie stood off to the side like a woman who'd lit a fuse and just realized she didn't know how long it was. My mother kept narrating. She said she'd prayed for this day. She said all that mattered was that her family was whole again. And then, smooth as anything, with the whole front of the diner half listening, she got to the point dressed up as love. She said, "And now your father needs us, baby. Now's our chance to be a family the way God intended." She said it with her hand on her heart, and I watched 2 tables full of decent people start to nod along, because she was good. She was so good. She'd been doing this my whole life. This was the trap exactly as I'd known it would be. Sympathy for the sweet old church-going mother, reunited with her hard-hearted runaway, asking only for a little Christian mercy. The whole room was tilting her way. So I poured them coffee, and I asked everyone to sit down. I seated them in the big corner booth, the one with a clear sightline to the counter, where Earl and the nurses and half the room could see and hear without trying. I did it on purpose. I poured 3 coffees and one for myself, and I sat down across from them, calm as a Sunday. And I let the room settle back into its noise for a moment. My mother kept going, telling me how good the place looked, how she always knew I had it in me, rewriting the past in real time into a story where she'd believed in me all along. I let her finish. Then I set my coffee down and I said, in a voice that was quiet but carried, the kind of voice you learn running a floor for years, "Before we talk about Dad and before we talk about family, I think we should agree on what actually happened at the station." The word landed like a dropped tray. My mother's smile stayed up, but her eyes went flat. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she said. "You ran off." We were heartbroken. She said it for the room as much as for me. Rennie looked at her coffee. My father looked at me, and for the first time something moved in his face that wasn't performance. I kept my voice level. I said I understood that was the story they'd told. I said I'd told a different one for 20 years, to almost nobody, because it had always been my word against theirs and theirs had a choir. "But here's the thing, Mom," I said, and I reached down beside me and brought up the plain folder and laid it on the table between the coffee cups. It was never just my word. There were other people there that night, and they wrote it all down. I opened the folder slowly, not for drama, but because I wanted my hands steady and they were. I turned the first sheet so it faced them. The police welfare check report, the county seal plain at the top. I didn't snatch it or wave it. I just laid it down where they could read it, where Rennie could read it, where Earl at the counter could see there was an official document on the table. And then I read the line aloud, flat and clear, the way you read a recipe. No heat in it at all. I read the date. I read the time, 9:40 at night. I read that a deputy responded to a report of a 14-year-old left at the station by her parents. I read that the deputy attempted to contact the parents and left a message that their daughter was in county custody. And then I read the last line, the one Maeve's instinct had been protecting me toward for 20 years. The parents declined to return for the minor. I set the second sheet beside it, the page from the social worker's file, and I read my mother's own quoted words back to her, the ones about me running off ungrateful, written down the day she said them. The diner had gone quiet in our corner, the kind of quiet that spreads. I looked at my mother, and I said the only cruel thing I let myself say all day, except it wasn't cruel. It was just hers. Handed back. I said, "You told me to find my own way home." I let it sit. I did. This is it. You're sitting in it. My voice never rose. It didn't have to. The paper was doing the talking, and paper doesn't lie, and it doesn't gloat. It just sits there being true in front of a room full of people who'd been about to feel sorry for the wrong person. I folded my hands on the table and I waited. My mother broke the way a frozen pipe breaks, all at once and loud. She shoved the report off the table and it fluttered to the floor, and her voice came up out of the church-going register into something raw I hadn't heard since the car. "How dare you?" she said, and now the whole diner was listening, not pretending not to. "You ungrateful, hateful girl, you always did this. You always made yourself the victim." She was loud now, half standing, her good coat sliding off her shoulder, the warm mother act gone like it had never been. She said I'd embarrassed the family, that I'd always been dramatic, that I'd twisted a misunderstanding into a tragedy to punish people who loved me. The regulars weren't softening anymore. Earl had set down his paper. The night nurses were watching with the flat professional faces of women who've seen people show their true selves under stress. The thing about a performance of calm goodness is that it only works until someone makes it perform under pressure, and then the real face comes out, and everyone sees it. My mother gave them the real face. She called me a liar over a document with the county seal on it, 3 feet from a deputy's signature, and every person in that diner watched her do it. Rennie had her hand over her mouth, and my father, who had not said one word, slowly bent down, picked the fallen report up off the floor, and read it. I watched him read the line. I watched 20 years move across his face. He did not defend her. He did not say I was dramatic. He just held the paper and got very, very still, while my mother stood over the table shouting that she'd raised an ingrate, and the room she'd come to charm watched her become the thing I'd been called. I let my mother run out of breath. You can't argue someone out of a tantrum, you can only outlast it. When she finally stopped, panting, looking around at a room full of faces that were no longer on her side, I gave them my answer, calm and final. I said no. I said I would not be tested and I would not be a donor, and I said why, plainly, so no one could rewrite it later. I said these people drove away from a 14-year-old and were told that night that she was alone, and they declined to come back. I said you don't get to abandon a child, spend 20 years calling her the one who left, and then show up needing her body. I said it without heat, which made it land harder. Then I did the cleanest thing I've ever done. I said the door was closed, and it would stay closed, and that this was a boundary, not a punishment. I told them I hoped my father found a match, truly, and that if he wanted, I'd send the name of a good transplant program, because wishing him well cost me nothing, and wishing him harm would have cost me everything I'd built. That was when my father finally spoke. He looked up from the report, and his voice cracked, and he said the only honest thing any of them said that day. He said, I should have turned around. A single broken sentence, 20 years too late, but true, and I think it cost him more than the kidney would have. I nodded at him, because I'm not made of stone, and a true thing deserves a nod. But I didn't take it back. A real apology doesn't undo a thing. It just tells you the person finally sees it. I let him have those honest words. Then I stood up. There wasn't much left to do but open the door, so I did. I held it the way I hold it for any customer leaving, polite, steady, no slam. My mother gathered her coat and her dignity and swept out muttering about ingratitude to a room that had stopped believing her. Rennie paused in front of me, and for a second I thought she might finally say it. The true thing. I'm sorry. But she didn't have it in her, so she just said my name once, soft, and followed our mother out. My father went last. He set the report down gently on the table like it was something fragile, and he met my eyes, and he didn't perform anything. He just left. The bell rang behind them, the same bell that rings 100 times a day for people who choose to come back. And they were gone. 3 taillights into the bright Sunday afternoon, and this time I was the one who stayed put, in my own warm, full place. The room didn't go right back to normal. Earl gave me a small nod over his coffee. One of the nurses caught my eye and mouthed, "You okay?" And I nodded that I was. Pam came over and squeezed my shoulder once, hard, and went back to her tables. Nobody made a fuss, which was the kindest thing they could have done, but I knew, and they knew, that the wayward daughter story had just died in the only town where it might have followed me. It didn't have a choir here, it had witnesses now. The boundary held, because I built it the way I build everything, to last. They didn't come back. A few weeks later, a short letter came from Rennie. No return address. 3 careful paragraphs that still couldn't find the word sorry. Only, I hope you understand we did what we thought was best. I read it once and put it in the same drawer where Carol Briggs's card had waited 20 years, not as a wound, just as a record, because I keep the proof now, all of it. I never heard whether my father found a match. I made my peace with not knowing. Wishing him well from a distance turned out to be exactly as far as my love could safely reach, and that was enough. The diner kept humming. Diego made his pies, Pam ran her floor, Earl drank his black coffee, the bell rang, and rang. And one quiet Tuesday, I took the train ticket stub and Carol Briggs's soft-cornered card, and I had them framed, the 2 of them behind glass, and I hung them on the wall by the register where I'd see them every day. Not to relive it, to remember that the truth survived, that a frightened girl did the right things and a kind woman saved the proof, and that between the 2 of them they outlasted a lie with a choir. People ask me sometimes what the little frame is. I tell them it's a long story about finding your way home. Then I pour them a coffee, in the home I built, in the town that kept me, and I get back to work, which is the most honest, happy ending I know how to give you. If someone ever drives off and tells you to find your own way home, believe them, then go find it, and build it so solid and so true that the day they come looking, the door already belongs to you. That's where I'll leave you, in the warm middle of a place I built from a gravel lot, the taillights, the tin box. Let's see how she finds her way home. The county report face up on the table. If someone rewrote your story while you weren't in the room, keep your proof and keep your peace. Because paper doesn't lie and a boundary doesn't owe an apology. If this reached you, share it with someone who needs it, drop a comment, and subscribe.